In the glamorous world of Hollywood, where every smile hides a story and every secret has a price, a new storm is brewing beneath the surface of red carpets and flashing cameras, a storm that could change everything for one of the industry's most admired couples, because tonight we are pulling back the curtain on a legal twist that has the entire town whispering about Blake, lively Ryan Reynolds, Justin Baldoni, and a mysterious digital trail that might connect them all in a city that thrives on image and illusion, where loyalty is currency and privacy is a myth. The latest revelation has sent shockwaves through every corner of Hollywood. The ruling from Judge Louis Lyman of the Southern District of New York has done more than just move a case forward. It has cracked open a story of access data and betrayal that few could have imagined. The whispers began quietly a few weeks ago, when sources close to the case started hinting that the court had found enough in the evidence to keep two of the most dangerous allegations alive. And as the news spread, the world began to realize that this was not just another celebrity lawsuit. This was about who had access to what, who crossed the invisible line between curiosity and control, and who might pay the ultimate price for letting ambition guide their every move. At the center stands Blake Lively's celebrated actress-entrepreneur partner to one of Hollywood's most likable figures. Ryan Reynolds. Together, they have built a public image so spotless that any crack in it feels like the sky itself might split. And yet here in the shadow of this new legal decision, their names are being whispered in connection with data that allegedly flowed from one phone in California through hands that should never have touched it into filings that could reshape everything, because behind every smile and every floral dress promotion lies a question no one wants to ask. How did the private phone data of Jen Abel end up woven into the legal and professional web surrounding Blake Lively's world? And what does that mean for the people who helped make it happen? The story begins not in a courtroom, but in the blurred line between personal and professional life, when Jen Abel, a publicist and creative collaborator, found herself suddenly locked out of her own digital life, unable to access her phone, her accounts, or even the messages that had once connected her to everyone she worked with. The phone that was supposed to be hers had she become something else, a doorway for someone else to step through, according to her claims. Stephanie Jones, another figure once trusted in the same circle, had gained access to that device using a passcode that Abel insists was given only for the brief purpose of transferring a number, nothing more. But what happened next, according to court filings, was anything but brief. Because once that access existed, it allegedly continued, it allegedly expanded. And before long, Abel says that the data from her phone found its way into a place no one expected: a lawsuit filed under the name of a company tied to Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, known as Van Zandt Inc. What began as a minor misunderstanding was suddenly a digital chain reaction that reached the highest levels of celebrity power. Judge Lyman dismissed some of the federal hacking statutes, saying they didn't meet the technical threshold, but that hardly mattered, because what survived was far more potent California Penal Code. Section 502, a law that punishes unauthorized computer access, and a conversion claim that treats the taking of digital property as civil theft. In plain terms, the judge said the story sounded plausible enough that the case could continue, and that was the moment the temperature in every Hollywood law office spiked, because Section 502 doesn't care whether the information is classified or confidential. It only cares if the access was knowing and without permission, and conversion doesn't require a digital mastermind. It simply punishes anyone who takes something that isn't theirs and keeps the rightful owner from using it. Now imagine what that means if the phone in question wasn't just any phone, but one filled with messages, contacts, photos, and conversations linked to some of the biggest names in entertainment. Suddenly, what was once private becomes potentially evidence, and what was once trust becomes risk. This is where the suspense begins, because when Judge Lyman ruled that Abel had adequately alleged knowing access without permission, he effectively opened the door to discovery, meaning that Abel can now begin to search through records, messages, and communications that might reveal exactly who touched what, when, and why. For Stephanie Jones, that could be disastrous, because Section 502 also carries criminal implications in the state of California, which means that if any prosecutor sees intent, the story could move from civil court to criminal investigation. And that is where Hollywood begins to tremble, because the same discovery that could reveal how a phone was accessed could also show how that information traveled to Van Zandt Inc., and eventually into the lawsuit Blake Lively filed against Justin Baldoni and others. And that potential chain of custody is the ticking clock in this unfolding drama. If Abel can prove that the phone was accessed by Jones, that Jones passed the data to Van Zandt, and that Van Zandt was acting for Blake, then the entire foundation of that lawsuit begins to crumble because the evidence would be tainted from the start, and that opens the door to sanctions, exclusion of evidence, and even damages against those who benefited knowingly or not from that unauthorized access. Imagine the irony: an actress whose public persona thrives on empowerment, kindness, and trust now facing the possibility that her legal filings could be linked to material obtained without authorization. It doesn't make her guilty, but it places her in a spotlight far harsher than any red carpet flashbulb. And the timing couldn't be worse because every Hollywood insider knows that once discovery begins, the truth has a way of slipping out one message at a time. Judge Lyman emphasized that Abel's allegations made sense, especially when read together with her claim that she had only allowed access for a number transfer, that her employer had no policy permitting surveillance of her phone, and that she had every reason to believe her privacy would remain intact. Those details matter because they paint a picture, not of recklessness, but of betrayal by someone inside her own professional circle. The tension builds with every line of the ruling as it becomes clear that this is no longer a fight about one phone or one lawsuit. It is about control of narrative, about who gets to tell the story first, and who is left defending their version under oath. And as the entertainment world watches, analysts and insiders are already asking the question: if this ruling opens the path for Abel to prove her case, how far up the chain will accountability reach, and will the bright lights of Hollywood be able to blind the truth once it steps into the courtroom? As the whispers spread across Beverly Hills and beyond, the media's attention turned like a swarm of lenses toward the few people who dared to speak on record. And the pattern was impossible to ignore, because what started as polite avoidance was now open speculation. And every conversation from talent agencies to PR offices revolved around one name. One story, one fallout that could alter reputations permanently. And in the center of it all stood a woman once adored for her charm and elegance, now watched for every blink, every breath, every reaction she failed to control. And those who knew her best whispered that the pressure was not just external anymore, because behind the designer sunglasses and carefully staged smiles was someone unraveling quietly in private, while pretending the noise didn't hurt, but it did. More than anyone could have imagined, because what she had built on image was now being tested by truth. And truth is never glamorous, never filtered, never gentle. And that was the tone that Hollywood insiders felt radiating from the entire debacle. The conversations that used to revolve around movie scripts, brand deals, and charity galas shifted overnight into something darker, something that pulsed beneath the red carpet smiles. Because everyone could sense that this was not a temporary scandal or a PR bump. It was an existential crisis for one of Hollywood's golden couples. And the cracks were visible in every public appearance they tried to hold together, every interview where the laughter sounded forced, every photograph where the distance between them was disguised by a pose. And the public, trained now to read body language like crime scenes, noticed every sign, dissected every frame, and the illusion began to slip faster than anyone could stop it. In private circles, a different story was being whispered, one that couldn't be confirmed but couldn't be ignored either. And it revolved around loyalty, alliances, and power, three forces that rule the entertainment industry even more than talent or art. And sources close to the situation revealed that the calls between studios had turned tense, that deals were being reconsidered, that phone numbers, once open lines of friendship, were now rerouted through assistants and lawyers. And this silent restructuring of social order in Hollywood said more than any tabloid headline ever could. Because when the people who once cheered you start to distance themselves quietly, it means they know something is coming. The tension grew thicker when the first leaks appeared. Small fragments, out-of-context quotes, alleged messages that began circulating in private group chats among journalists and industry insiders. And though no one could verify them immediately, the mere suggestion of their existence was enough to send PR teams into panic mode. Because in this business, perception often matters more than proof. And once perception turns, it's nearly impossible to reverse. And for someone who built an empire on being adored, the sudden shift in tone was devastating. And yet she still smiled in public, still walked the red carpets, still gave interviews pretending nothing had changed. But behind closed doors, crisis management had taken over, and every word was being scripted, every move calculated. Because damage control had become the new daily routine inside the PR war room. The conversations were frantic and divided, some arguing that transparency was the only path forward, while others insisted on silence, hoping the storm would pass. But those who knew the media cycle understood that silence is rarely protection. It's an invitation for speculation. And while lawyers drafted responses and publicists crafted talking points, the internet was already rewriting the narrative. And in the age of screenshots and viral threads, control was slipping faster than they could type. And the story was morphing into something unrecognizable, something emotional, something personal, something that couldn't be managed by press releases anymore. The more she tried to control the narrative, the louder it grew. And what once felt like admiration began to feel like interrogation, with fans dissecting every quote, journalists revisiting old interviews for hidden meanings, and former colleagues suddenly feeling emboldened to speak on record about how they'd been treated in the past. And those sound bites were brutal because they painted a picture not of the Hollywood sweetheart the public adored, but of someone driven by fear and control, someone who valued image over truth, someone who had burned bridges she thought she'd never need again. And now the same people she dismissed were the ones shaping her story. And that irony didn't go unnoticed. Meanwhile, the person at the center of the storm, her on-screen collaborator turned unexpected rival, stayed remarkably quiet. And that silence only made things worse for her, because it made him appear calm, mature, grounded. And as the public compared their reactions side by side, the narrative shifted completely, casting her as reactive, defensive, and unstable. While he appeared composed and dignified, and in Hollywood's court of public opinion, that kind of contrast can decide everything, because people don't just remember what happened, they remember how you handled it. And in that comparison, she was losing. But what the public didn't know yet, what only a few insiders whispered, was that this silence wasn't indifference, it was strategy. A legal chess move designed to let her reveal too much, to let her words become evidence, and when the filings finally hit the court system, those who had followed the story from the beginning realized they'd been watching a slow-motion implosion disguised as a PR war, and the legal documents were devastating, filled with contradictions that painted her public statements as misleading at best. And that realization rippled through every corner of the entertainment industry like a shockwave. The documents hinted at conversations, emails, and decisions made behind the scenes that contradicted years of carefully maintained public image. And when portions of those materials leaked through unnamed sources, the world saw not the Hollywood fairy tale they'd been sold, but a much more complicated, human and painful reality of ego, competition, and betrayal. And though the case was technically about defamation, everyone could see that it was really about exposure, about which truth the world would believe when the lights went out and the cameras stopped rolling, as journalists began connecting the dots, tracing timelines and interviewing people from the periphery. New names surfaced: directors, producers, stylists, assistants, each with their own perspective, their own piece of the puzzle, and together those fragments began to form an uncomfortable picture, that the power dynamics behind Hollywood's golden image were fragile and cruel, that friendships often existed only as extensions of contracts, and that loyalty was conditional, vanishing the moment it became inconvenient. And in that ecosystem, the fall of one person could set off a chain reaction that redefined alliances across the industry. By the time the first major outlet published its exposé, the damage was irreversible because what had once been private was now public record, and the tone of coverage shifted from gossip to accountability, from admiration to analysis. And while some tried to spin it as exaggerated drama, others recognized it as a cultural moment, a reckoning that revealed the hidden cost of fame, where success was measured not by artistry, but by how long one could survive the pressure of maintaining perfection in a world that thrives on scandal through it all. She still tried to project grace, attending events, smiling for cameras, and pretending that the noise didn't affect her. But those closest to her described a different scene. Long nights of anxiety, desperate phone calls to confidants, a growing sense of isolation as even her closest allies began distancing themselves quietly, fearing that association could damage their own brands. And in Hollywood, where loyalty is currency, that kind of abandonment can feel like erasure, and yet she refused to disappear, clinging to the hope that one major interview, one well-placed statement, could turn it all around. But redemption is tricky in an industry that feeds on downfall, and by the time she sat down for that now infamous interview, the one that was supposed to be her moment of clarity, the world had already moved on. Their sympathy spent, their curiosity waning, and instead of empathy, the audience met her words with skepticism, dissecting her tone, her body language, her choice of phrasing, searching for any hint of manipulation. And when the segment aired, the reactions were brutal, because instead of salvaging her reputation, it reopened wounds and reminded everyone of the contradictions she'd tried to bury from that moment. The conversation wasn't about misunderstanding anymore. It was about truth versus perception, And even those who once defended her began to admit that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't as black and white as they'd believed. And the question shifted from what happened to who are you really? And in that shift, everything changed, because once the public stops seeing you as relatable and starts seeing you as manufactured, the trust is gone. And trust, once lost, is the one currency that even fame can't buy back. As months passed, Hollywood adjusted to its new reality, one where silence spoke louder than press tours and absence felt like a statement. And while she retreated from the spotlight to regroup, her rival's quiet dignity kept earning him new respect, new opportunities, new alliances. And that imbalance, the contrast between her chaos and his calm, became symbolic of something bigger. A mirror reflecting the way power dynamics in Hollywood can flip overnight, depending on who controls the narrative and who has the patience to let truth reveal itself. And then, just when it seemed like the story might finally fade into obscurity, a new filing emerged, one that hinted at unseen evidence, sealed communications, and the possibility of even deeper truths yet to be uncovered. And suddenly the entire cycle began again, with headlines screaming, fans debating, and Hollywood holding its breath, wondering what else might still come to light. Because in this town, stories never truly end, they just evolve, waiting for the next revelation to ignite them all over again. As the new filings hit the court docket, the tone across Hollywood shifted from curiosity to fear. Because what these documents contained wasn't just gossip, it was evidence. Structured, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. The kind of material that doesn't just change public perception, but rewrites it entirely. And suddenly, every journalist who had covered the story before realized they had only been scratching the surface. Because beneath the glamorous narrative of betrayal and misunderstanding was a labyrinth of private communications, leaked memos, and strategic omissions that revealed how deeply the image machine of celebrity culture runs, how carefully every move is choreographed until the truth forces its way through. The public wanted answers. The tabloids wanted headlines, and the lawyers wanted control. But no one could contain the momentum anymore, because the story had outgrown them all, feeding on its own energy, evolving through social media algorithms and influencer commentary, where every opinion became an echo and every echo turned into evidence in the court of public opinion. And in this modern ecosystem, the line between journalism and entertainment blurred completely, leaving audiences unsure whether they were watching a legal drama, a PR collapse, or the unraveling of a cultural myth for those inside the industry. It was a masterclass in downfall, studied and discussed in private lunches and studio meetings, not with sympathy but with fascination, because in Hollywood, someone else's destruction is always someone else's lesson. And executives whispered about how quickly narratives can turn, how fragile reputations have become, and how even the most polished star can crumble if their foundation is built on denial rather than truth. And through it all, the woman at the center of it remained both victim and villain. Depending on who you asked, her name now synonymous with the cautionary tale no one wanted to be behind closed doors. The internal conflicts grew unbearable, with her team fractured between loyalty and survival, some choosing to stay silent while others leaked quietly to protect themselves. And in that chaos, the once united front began to disintegrate, revealing the deep mistrust that had been festering all along. Because in Hollywood, silence isn't solidarity. It's often negotiation. And the very people who once helped craft her public image were now whispering to reporters, feeding them select details that painted a more complex picture, one that mixed arrogance with vulnerability, calculation with desperation. The rival at the center of her storm, calm, deliberate, and visibly reluctant to speak, became the industry's unexpected hero, a man whose quiet defiance contrasted perfectly with her spiraling defensiveness. And it wasn't lost on the public that his silence seemed to carry more integrity than her 1,000 explanations. And soon, even those who once supported her began to question her motives, wondering if this wasn't about truth at all, but about control, about rewriting history before history rewrote her. And as that perception grew, her influence began to fade, sponsorships went quiet, phone calls stopped returning, and the glittering world she'd ruled began to dissolve beneath her feet. The tension reached its breaking point when the leaks expanded, revealing fragments of correspondence that, though redacted, hinted at deeper manipulation and behind-the-scenes maneuvering that contradicted her narrative completely. And though her legal team rushed to discredit them, the court of public opinion had already made its decision, because once the idea of deceit takes root, no amount of denial can erase it. And in this age of viral outrage, the audience no longer waits for official verdicts. They create their own, shaped by emotion, bias, and the addictive thrill of watching power crumble. Meanwhile, The media's fascination turned almost anthropological, dissecting the downfall with the precision of a case study, with experts brought on to analyze body language, crisis strategy, and the psychology of fame. And every segment, every article, every think piece added another layer to the mythology, transforming a private conflict into a cultural reflection on authenticity and ambition. And though she had once been adored for embodying perfection, now she was being redefined as the symbol of its cost, and that metamorphosis, once complete, would be irreversible. Her few remaining allies urged retreat, a break, a step away from the spotlight. But retreat was something she couldn't comprehend. Because fame, once it defines you, doesn't release you easily. And even as the backlash intensified, she held on to the belief that one more appearance, one more gesture of grace could repair the narrative. But the irony was cruel. The more she tried to fix it, the more it fell apart. Because every move she made was now seen not as sincerity, but as strategy. And sincerity cannot be faked in a world already convinced you've been pretending all along. The quiet rivals team, on the other hand, remained disciplined, avoiding the trap of overexposure, speaking only through filings and formal statements, projecting calm professionalism while letting the facts do the talking. And this contrast became the story itself, the difference between noise and substance, between spin and silence. And in that dichotomy, audiences began to shift their loyalty, realizing that perhaps the real hero isn't the one shouting for attention, but the one who doesn't need to. As the trial dates loomed closer, the pressure grew unbearable, and those close to her described sleepless nights, erratic calls, and desperate attempts to control leaks that had already spiraled beyond containment. And though the public saw only curated snapshots, the truth was far less elegant, a network of strained friendships, shattered trust, and the haunting realization that fame had become a cage she built herself, gilded but suffocating, beautiful but empty. And behind the polished facade, she was breaking down piece by piece, still smiling, still posting, still pretending that everything was fine. But even the best performances eventually end in an effort to reclaim control. She authorized a tell-all interview, this time filmed under her terms, her lighting, her narrative. But what she didn't realize was that control doesn't equal redemption. And when the interview aired, the world didn't see strength or vulnerability. They saw deflection, evasion, and a person still unable to acknowledge their own role in the storm. And the backlash was swift, trending hashtags dissecting her tone, her phrasing, even her pauses. And that night, as headlines blared and social media burned, insiders whispered that this might have been the final mistake, the moment where redemption became impossible. The rival, by contrast, made no comment, issued no statement, appeared in no interview, and his silence spoke volumes, interpreted as grace, wisdom, even nobility, while hers was reframed as manipulation, and the public's appetite for accountability turned ravenous, feeding on her every misstep, her every reaction, her every attempt to reclaim sympathy, until she became not a person but a symbol, a reflection of Hollywood's obsession with perfection and its punishment for imperfection. And though she had once believed that her image could protect her, it had now become the very weapon being used to destroy her behind the cameras. The power players took note, learning, adapting, preparing for their own storms, because this wasn't just one star's fall. It was a warning, a demonstration of what happens when control meets transparency, when private ambition collides with public scrutiny. And even as the narrative shifted from scandal to spectacle, no one could deny the deeper truth it exposed. That fame, once worshipped, now operates under a microscope so unforgiving that even the most careful manipulation eventually fails. As the weeks turned into months, and the filings kept coming, it became clear that this wasn't just about two celebrities. It was about the entire system that enables illusion, the machinery that builds icons only to dismantle them when they stop performing perfectly. And as the public consumed every update, they became complicit too, part of the same cycle of fascination and condemnation, cheering for destruction in the same breath that mourned it, proving that in modern fame, the audience isn't just watching the show, they're writing it, and still, through all of it, she refused to disappear. Posting curated images of serenity, projecting resilience while privately unraveling, and though the world had turned its gaze toward new scandals, her name lingered like a ghost, a reminder of what can happen when the line between authenticity and performance vanishes completely, and when the truth you've hidden finally demands to be seen. In the end, the story of her rise and fall became more than just another Hollywood scandal. It was a mirror held up to an industry built on illusion, a world that rewards perfection, punishes vulnerability, and forgets humanity in the pursuit of fame. The red carpets, the interviews, the carefully filtered posts. They were all chapters in a performance that had gone on too long, until the curtain finally dropped and the audience saw what lay behind the glow. Beneath the designer gowns and perfect smiles was a person terrified of losing control in a system that teaches you to fear irrelevance more than failure. The rival, quiet and steady, emerged not as her enemy, but as the unintended reflection of what authenticity looks like in a world addicted to spectacle. His silence wasn't strategy anymore, it was strength. Her noise wasn't confidence, it was survival. And as the dust settled, Hollywood moved on to its next obsession, but something fundamental had shifted. The myth of untouchable perfection had cracked, revealing the cost of maintaining it. Today, her name no longer dominates the headlines, but her story remains a lesson whispered in studio halls and PR meetings, a reminder that in an era where everything can be recorded, leaked or replayed, image is no longer enough. The truth always surfaces, no matter how deeply it's buried beneath glamour and control. And when it does, it asks one devastating question. Who are you when the cameras stop? Because in Hollywood, the spotlight doesn't just illuminate, it exposes. And sometimes what it reveals is not the star we thought we knew, but the person we were never meant to see.